Welcome back. This is Sunday edition here on KTN News. Now, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC, seems to be heading into a constitutional crisis, according to legal experts. The law stipulates that only a person qualified to be a judge can chair the electoral body, and as currently constituted, only Chairman Wafula Chebukati has that qualification. So although he is under pressure from some Jubilee Party members to quit, if he gives in to that pressure, the IEBC could be paralyzed, as Duncan Haemba now tells us.
According to the IEBC Act of 2011, under qualifications for appointment as chairperson or member of the IEBC, the Act says the chairperson of the Commission shall be a person who is qualified to hold office of Judge of the Supreme Court under the Constitution. It's this statute that could as well plunge the nation into a serious constitutional crisis in the event IEBC Chair Wafula Chebukati throws in the towel anytime. In the entire commission, it's only the chair who is a lawyer, meaning should he crack under pressure and resign, then there'll be no one else in the team to step forward and steady the ship.
For the interests of the country, institutional stability and so on, it is better if the commissioners work their way around the differences of opinion that they have been manifesting in public. It is important that the chair, the office of chair of the commission is respected by the other commissioners and his authority is respected, and it is also important for the chair to respect the other commissioners. And
legal minds argue that the law does not allow the president to make any appointments to the commission during an election season. But according to High Court Advocate Charles Kanjama, in the unlikely event that the entire commission resigns, or worse, a section of them, then the principle of doctrine of necessity might be invoked by the president.
If you had this constitutional crisis where commissioners left office, resigned, and therefore did not anymore, were not available, then it may be possible under the doctrine of necessity for the president to appoint new commissioners after the process of selection by a selection panel and approval by Parliament has been undertaken.
There are reports that sharp divisions have emerged at the IEBC. Initially, it was commissioners on one side and the Secretariat on the other, a crisis that has mutated among the 7 commissioners, whereby 4 are said to be against 3, among them the chair.
The Constitution of Kenya, constitutional commissions are deemed to have been duly set up when they have at least 3 commissioners.
Unlike the inaugural IEBC, which had several lawyers as commissioners, apart from the current chair, the rest don't have legal backgrounds, which Kanjama says might be the commission's biggest undoing, more so under the prevailing storm rocking the team.
Those who are appointing commissioners to bodies like IEBC to recruit more lawyers into the commission. But even if the commission had more lawyers, no one else can just take over the role of chair without following the constitutional and statutory processes. So the challenge would still have been the same. The benefit of having more lawyers in the commission is that the commission can receive advice from within the commissioners themselves without having to rely only on external advice or advice from lawyers working in the Secretariat.
There are claims that some commissioners who are now opposed to how the chair is running affairs at the Anniversary Towers are being approached by certain political quarters to resign in order to cripple the team. IEBC has only 37 days to go before fresh presidential election on 17th October, a day that might either bring to a halt Raila Odinga's presidential political run or bring to a stop President Uhuru Kenyatta's 5-year reign, depending on how the cookie crumbles. Duncan Haemba, KTN News.
All right, a lot happening in the electoral body, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. That is what we want to discuss in the next 1 hour or so. But very quickly, this position of IEBC chair, from Duncan's story right there. I mean, the law is very clear. He is the only one who can be chairman. What if he was to quit, what would happen?
Then we would definitely plunge into a constitutional crisis. But maybe before we look at the constitutional crisis, it's very interesting that now memos are flying from the commission to the secretariat and from secretariat to commission, and the commission is taking different positions, which in my view is a very good idea, because now for the first time, we are actually beginning to appreciate what is happening within the commission and how the elections were conducted. And it actually vindicates the Supreme Court ruling when they said that the presidential election was anchored by illegalities and irregularities. Now, some of the questions that Chebukati is asking the Secretariat to respond to are very pertinent and reinforces one of the determinations by the Supreme Court. You remember when they began the hearings, the Supreme Court gave an order that they needed to open up their servers, the entire ICT infrastructure to be opened up. And for some reason, I don't know whether it was the Commission or the Secretariat which refused to comply. And one begins to wonder, if indeed you ran a free, fair, and credible election, why would you be embarrassed to open up the server for public scrutiny so that we can actually know who won the election and who lost the election, so that we can establish whether indeed there were irregularities or whether there were illegalities? Now, the memo written by Chebukati to the Secretariat is very solid, and it brings open that, in fact, there was a lot of mischief. But now the mischief is not even in that memo. It's there are two commissioners. Their names were included in a second letter. They disowned the letter, said that they're not associated with that. Then a few moments later, they said, no. We don't like the way Chebukati is running the commission. And the Chebukati, being a lawyer, I suspect a good lawyer, when he's making all these moves, he's not doing this in his capacity as the chair of the Electoral Commission. He's doing it in his capacity as the national returning officer for the presidential election, which again brings...
So he did not need to consult.
He did not need to consult them. He needed to act. And wherever if you've got a board or a commission which is divided, the buck stops with you as the chairman, as the returning officer for the presidential election. So you cannot just sit on your hands and say, wait a minute, I'm going to go into prayer to wait for the commissioners to get united. You have to take a decision. But the moves over the last few weeks indicates that this commission, in fact, is controlled by cartels. It's controlled by powerful personalities outside the commission, all of them who are very eager to please their masters. That's why you have the commission thinking in two different directions. And it's dangerous for our nation, Kenya, that in as much as when you become a commissioner, you are entitled to hold your political views, but you are not supposed to serve your political masters at the expense of running a free and fair, credible election. Now, moving progress, because, we can discuss this till the cows come home, I think it's important for both Jubilee and NASA to come up with a bipartisan committee to go and check out, do a quick audit at IBC and establish what are these errors, or rather these irregularities and illegalities established by the Supreme Court, clean up that mess, come up with a brand new secretariat, get the returning officers and presiding officers agreed by both Jubilee and NASA so that we can go to an election. Because right now, if you go to an election with the current setup, then it's going to be another mess. You'll have another election nullified. And I see Brian proactively disagreeing with this. But let's ask ourselves, who is the prime beneficiary of the status quo? The prime beneficiary of status quo is going to be Jubilee, and that's why it's disagreeing with my proposal.
Brian?
I think this must live in a parallel universe where the sky is pink and fiction become facts, claiming that commissioners have some people controlling them. The reason why the Constitution put them at odd numbers is because they can take a vote. Even in corporate world right now, you don't have to agree. Even in our election, candidates don't get 100%. So there's nothing different with the commission disagreeing, but they can take a vote. That's why we gave them an odd number. Number two, when this must say that Chebukati is acting as the national returning officer, then why is he sending the memo to the secretariat? Why is he passing the buck? Because he should be answering those questions himself as the national returning officer. And
shouldn't he ask questions as a returning officer of the presidential?
He's fully
election?
in charge. Secretariat IEBC was sued together with the chairman of the commission in his capacity. So it is his own responsibility. If he's passing the buck to Chiloba, then he was not in charge. I can compare it to Isaac Hassan. He was in charge of the commission, and he protected its independence. And that's why they went out home with their package intact and their dignity intact, because he was in charge of the commission. Chebukati is not in charge. And that's why
you have
we
to
are having these
appreciate
problems.
the fact that, Brian, the fact that the commissioners came into office just 7 months to the election.
Yes.
The Secretariat has more institutional memory.
Yes.
Another thing is, in that memo that he wrote to Ezra Chiloba, all of the things he wanted to find out is why his name was used to create an account and password, and that used to access the servers. That personally, it's personally a question that he has to know.
You know, when you say they came 7 months to election, even Chiloba came 7 months to election with the same commissioners. So on that level, you put them down. You put them out. They came almost the same time after the. But
the Secretariat was the one that was hands-on.
Meaning Chebukati was not in charge. If you were in charge, you could have flagged out those things.
If I may interject,
Hesbon, do you think Chebukati was right to demand for those answers?
He was right, because if you look at the Commission and the Secretariat, the Commission is in charge of policy and strategic direction.
And oversight.
Of IEBC.
Yes.
But the day-to-day running of IEBC is in the hands of the Secretariat. They have the institutional mandate. They have a policy framework that supports what they are doing. And all they have to do is to report to the Commission on how then they're implementing the strategic goals and the policies. And to that extent, you don't expect Chebukati to be in the business of creating, accounts and so on and so forth. So he's actually right. He's actually right to question the Secretariat that how comes an account was created in my name? And how come this account was not even given to one person? It is many people who logged in many times. So to that extent, you cannot say that because he's questioning, he's not in charge. He is in charge.
I can say,
even questioning in itself means that he has taken authority as the chair
then I can say,
to look at how the policies and the strategies are implemented by the Commission. But if I may continue.
1 minute. Then Chebukati is jumping the gun. Because we don't know who was vindicated by the Supreme Court. We don't know how the judgment was. Right now, people will say he's witch hunting. Because the Supreme Court, to me, did us a very bad thing by not releasing the judgment immediately. And before they retired to make the judgment, they said, you have to hurry up, counsel, because we don't want a scenario like 2013 where we give a 2-minute judgment. But what did they do? And in 2013, the status quo remained. So the judgment was not that important to Kenyans. But right now, IEBC is supposed to set election in 60 days. IEBC don't have to wait for 21 days for them to read that judgment.
Good point.
So we should pressure also the Supreme Court to release the judgment so that we can see the names mentioned in the judgment. Otherwise, whatever Chebukati is doing, maybe he has a hand in the ruling also.
One thing is clear, Chebukati is a lawyer. So any pronouncements, any memo that he writes from the wrappings of the law. So there is something he understands beyond an ordinary Kenyan who is just looking at the way things are panning out from a lens that is not tinted by law. But I think having said that, we cannot belabor the point that the Supreme Court did not give us the judgment immediately. When we were listening to the judgment, it was made clear that respondent number 3 had no problem in as far as the bungled elections were concerned. The buck was with IEBC. So if you put everything constant, it means that it is not like Uhuru did not win from the judgment. Uhuru won in terms of numbers. But the processes and the system was so flawed that the credibility of that win is in question. That simply tells you that even Uhuru's victory has been denied by IEBC. And therefore, Jubilee should be at the forefront supporting the purge on IEBC, not even on the commissioners. It is the Secretariat. And if you want to extend it to the commissioners, ask yourself, why is it that we have a commissioner who was the chair of the commission, who was the returning officer for the presidential election, reading things that he didn't understand? But then that does not exonerate Chebukati, because you want to ask yourself, the affidavit that he swore, and when the judgment was going on, he was being defended on some of the things that he's raising right now, which tells you that the road is very, very grave. But I'll come back to Dismas. NASA went to court because they had issues with the system and the processes. Jubilee responded, and they were exonerated from any problem. It means these two people must sit down, because when NASA was going, they had a problem.
Right.
When the judgment was made, it was made clear that Jubilee did not have a problem. The rot is actually in IEBC. So what is the biggest deal here? The two sides of the political divide can actually sit together and forge a way forward.
All right. Mutinda, what are your thoughts on this? Before we I want us to get into that memo by Chebukati.
Yeah, my thoughts first are that the IEBC is a commission. And this issue of trying to separate the chair from other commissioners and the secretariat, those are sideshows. The truth of the matter is that they have been given a mandate by the Constitution as a commission, and none of them can work in isolation. That is where I want to start. And IEBC needs to know this, that there are people out there, those probably from NASA, who are mad at them because they think that they were denied their victory. There are those of us who are in Jubilee who are very mad at them because they caused the Supreme Court to deny us our victory. That is where they are. So they need to know that it is not NASA or Jubilee that are their friends. What is their friend is for them to stick to fulfilling their constitutional mandate. I am saying that because I want to put things in context. The truth of the matter is this, that we have constraints here. We have to do what we have to do within 60 days. So the question is the direction that the Commission is taking going to allow us to have this election by the 17th of October? So their focus, as at now, and according to me, and in that context, should be how best, with all that has happened, how best can we be best prepared and conduct this 17th of October elections and without repeating the mistakes that were pointed out by the Supreme Court. In context, that should be their primary objective. These other things are sideshows, yet we are facing the threat of falling into a constitutional crisis if they are not able to perform their constitutional mandate within the specified times. So let IEBC know that we gave them a job. I cannot start blaming.
But Mutinda, how can they concentrate on that when they're being fought from both sides of the political divide?
The question is this. From the word go, when they got their job, they knew they were independent. So at what point did they align themselves to these other forces to have so much effect on them to a point that they are no longer able to fulfill their mandate? They knew the kind of job they were going into. That's what I'm trying to say, that it is upon them. The buck stops with them. If they did not have the capacity, then it is going to be demonstrated by their inability to fulfill their mandate in the kind of situation we are in.
I agree with Mutinda, but I think the crux here is, if the buck stops with IEBC, IEBC is being questioned from the NASA front on a number of issues. The same IEBC is being questioned by Jubilee, and Mutinda has confirmed this, on a number of issues. So why, again, just let IEBC go about its business like these two political sides of the divide don't have a bearing on what they're doing? And ultimately, you may want to ask yourself, what is so difficult in these two sides of the political divide coming together to point out the real issues that are pertinent, that should be addressed by IEBC, and table the issues to IEBC and tell IEBC, we have a constraint of time, but you have to address these things for both sides of the political divide to be comfortable with what you're going to do. And I think that is what most Kenyans are looking forward to, that we have a political class that is responsive enough to down their differences and sort out the issues that unite Kenyans so that we have a free, fair, and credible election. And if all these things are done above board, then IEBC will be left on the spotlight, that the political class agreed on a number of things that you have to do. The Supreme Court indicted you guys. You had a problem. You've been given another opportunity to sort everything. They will be under pressure from Kenyans and not politicians. And I think they'll deliver a good election.
So far, Jubilee side have come out and said Chebukati has appointed a 6-man project team to manage the election, which has excluded Ezra Chiloba. Jubilee have rejected that team. IEBC have set up an election date, the 17th of October. NASA has come out and rejected that. Dismas, do you think there is political will to let this IEBC team, as much as it seems divided right now, to succeed?
Well, the mandate for Chebukati is the chairman of IEBC. The buck stops with him. There are no two ways about it. If you're running a private organization and you're the MD, you respond to the board. When the chairman and the board give you instructions to deliver as the managing director, you deliver. If you don't deliver, the board, through the chairman, will ask you to take a walk. If there are issues with the directors, still the buck stops with the chairman. It's supposed to crack the whip. And that's what one expects Chebukati to do. Now Chebukati, in his capacity as the National Returning Officer, says, I'm going to run the presidential election as a project. These are my project members. These are the key players who are going to drive the agenda. But when you go through those names with a careful interest, 50% of the people in that project are the ones who are blamed for the illegalities and irregularities by the Supreme Court. So how can you have those persons in that team? So NASA writes a letter saying, we object to this. The following day, Mr. Raphael Tuju gets also a number of names, and he says, these people, we don't trust them at IBC. We cannot have them to be part of that team. So where do we stand now? We need to get a team made up of Jubilee, NASA, and other key stakeholders to sit down with Mr. Chebukati so that we come up with
so you want a politically driven process, like the IPPG in 1997?
This thing is about politics. We cannot run away from this because the people who are putting pressure on Kenya are politicians. The people who have created suspense in Kenya are politicians. The politicians, in as much as the voter is supposed to be the biggest stakeholder, right now the voter doesn't have his way. Because when, for instance, when Raila Odinga says, I'm uncomfortable with the elections being held on the 17th, it became a talking point for a long time. Jubilee were throwing stones all over. But a few days ago when he says, wait a minute, we can now have this election, everything has come down. Now Jubilee has gone to the NASA pay bill number saying you are raising money and we don't know why you are taking it. So the politicians are the biggest stakeholders. So we must have a special audit. We don't need to wait for the Supreme Court.
So why did you create the IEBC?
No. Sorry?
As a country.
Sorry?
Why did you create the IEBC as a country? I'm just being the devil's advocate here. If politicians are going to come out and stone it every time and want other people to come in.
You see, when IBC was being created, and as I suggest, Kenyans erroneously assumed that these commissioners are actually going to be independent and they're going to be loyal to the state. But from the Supreme Court and from the memo written by Chebukati, it now occurs to us that they are in fact cartels who are running IBC. And a strong demonstration of the fact that the cartels running IBC, tell me, who would have the energy to disobey a court order from the Supreme Court unless you are getting protection from somewhere? Because when the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, gives issue, and I remember it's Justice Lenalo Reddy's, 12 orders, either the Secretariat or the Commission tiptoed around the issue, and at the end of the day, they did not relieve that one. That's a very strong statement that these commissioners are partisan. They're not looking at their job as a responsibility to the state. It goes back to their selfish interest, that you join a commission, you want to make some people happy, and in the process, you bango an election. You know, if Mr. Chiloba was a patriot, after the Supreme Court said that this election is null and void, it was marred by irregularities and illegalities, he would have gone back to his chambers and asked himself, because really the buck stops with me, where did we miss? And he tenders his resignation to the chairman. So that now the chairman has got a unique opportunity to clean up the system, come up with people, and we go for an election. And again, you know, for somebody who is saying that we've got 60 days, it's not sufficient time for an election, again, that's a fallacy. Because it's well known that if you go for a presidential election, you don't get an outright winner on round 1, you'll go for round 2. So again, one wants to assume that in fact IBC had prepared for this October 17th. The only thing they didn't know is the days. Now that you have those systems in place, you just need a team made up of courageous Kenyans to just go and fine-tune the system, get away the cobwebs, run away from cartels, and deliver a free and fair election. We don't want to start discussing whether Musando was killed or assassinated or it was an act of God, it just died a natural death. No. But we just want to assume that everything is going now to happen. You know, these commissioners must be, the staffers must be like Caesar's wife, beyond reproach. Yeah. We don't want partisan commissioners or partisan secretariat.
One of the things that the IEBC is going wrong is it's allowing itself to be captive to the political class. We are politicians, we have our own interests, so we pull on our side what is going to benefit us. They ordinarily should be very independent. So what should be guiding them is really not what we say or what we demand, because we can also have baseless demands, because this is politics. But the thing is, they should do whatever they are doing when they are sure that they are protected by the Constitution and the law of the land. The question is this: when Chebukati purported to do what he did, even putting together that project team unilaterally. The question is this: is he allowed to do that in law? Because we also do not want, as Jubilee, to go to another election and then the Supreme Court uses that technicality that actually this election was presided over by people who legally should not have done so. So my concern would not even be about what politicians are saying. My concern would be, is whatever the IEBC doing protected by the constitution and the law? Because the commission is not the chairman alone. As much as there are things that the chairman can unilaterally do, then when he does them, he should be clear that he has done them as the chairman. There are times that he does them as the commission. And the legally binding position is that most of the things should be done as a commission. So the question then would be, when he purports to do this unilaterally, does he have the support of the constitution and the law? The other question would be, okay, fine, that is what probably we were having issues with, that the team, the NASA was having issues with this team. Then Jubilee also brought another list of people they had issues with. The question is, on what basis? It cannot be about suspicion. It cannot be about politicking. It cannot be about perception. There has to be a basis for you making demands, so that whenever there is no basis in the constitution and in the law, the commission should ignore and focus on ensuring that on the 17th, we have a free, fair, and credible election.
A lot of thoughts on the IEBC. It is a job many have called a poisoned chalice. I mean, every time you take it, be prepared for this drama. But when we return after this quick commercial break, we'll take a look at that Chebukati memo and what it meant for the August 8th general election, and if it vindicated NASA's presidential petition at the Supreme Court. I'll get the gentleman's view on this. The IEBC is said to have a crucial crisis meeting today to discuss a number of things, a printing tender, as well as the project team created by the chairman of the IEBC, Ezra Chiloba. Their fate is, according to sources, said to be sealed today. When we return, we'll also talk about that, what the guys feel about that team, that project team by the IEBC. Don't go too far. This is Sunday Edition.